Carl Jung discovered something that terrified him more than any mental illness he had encountered. He found patients who had stopped wanting anything at all. Not depression, not burnout, but something far more dangerous. A state of complete apathy that Jung called the most lethal psychological condition in human existence. Today, I will show you why wanting nothing is not peace or enlightenment, but a psychological void that invites forces from your unconscious you cannot control, because when you stop wanting, something else starts wanting for you. Jung documented patients across his career who entered what he termed the state of desireless existence. These were not monks who had transcended attachment through years of practice. These were ordinary people who had simply given up on having goals, dreams, or personal desires. At first, Jung thought he was observing a form of depression, but these patients were not sad. They functioned normally in society, went to work, maintained relationships, yet internally they had become hollow. When Jung asked them what they wanted from life, they stared back with genuine confusion, as if the question itself made no sense. Jung realized he was witnessing something that modern psychology still does not fully understand: the complete shutdown of what he called psychic libido, the fundamental life energy that drives all human behavior and growth. But here is what made Jung's blood run cold. These patients did not stay empty for long. Jung observed that when conscious desire disappeared, unconscious content rushed in to fill the void. The psyche cannot tolerate emptiness. When the ego stops directing energy toward chosen goals, that energy does not simply vanish. It flows backward into the unconscious, empowering forces that were never meant to operate without conscious oversight. Jung called this process the activation of autonomous complexes. Parts of your psyche that should remain as background psychological structures suddenly gain independent power when they are fed by undirected energy. Think of it like this. Your conscious will is like a river flowing in a chosen direction, powering the life you want to build. When you stop wanting anything, that river does not dry up. It floods backward, giving power to psychological forces in your unconscious that were meant to stay dormant. Jung documented exactly what happens when desire collapses and the shadow takes control. The shadow is not evil. It is simply everything about yourself that you have denied, repressed, or refused to integrate consciously. It contains your capacity for selfishness, cruelty, manipulation, and destruction. In a healthy psyche, the shadow is acknowledged and integrated through conscious awareness. But when you want nothing, you stop doing the psychological work of integration. You stop choosing who you want to become. And here is the terrifying part. The shadow does not need your permission to act. It only needs your energy. Jung documented how patients in states of wanting nothing began exhibiting shadow behaviors without conscious awareness. They would sabotage relationships while claiming they did not care enough to be intentional about it. They would manipulate others while believing themselves to be passive victims of circumstance. The person who wants nothing becomes a puppet of their own shadow. They act out repressed psychological content while maintaining the illusion of peaceful detachment. But shadow activation is not even the most dangerous consequence of wanting nothing. Jung discovered that when personal desire completely collapses, archetypal content floods the conscious mind. You stop being yourself and become possessed by impersonal psychological forces that are far more powerful than your individual ego. This is what Jung meant by archetypal possession. When you abandon personal will and desire, you do not become free. You become a vessel for transpersonal energies that use you for their own purposes. The person who wants nothing might suddenly become possessed by the victim archetype, experiencing themselves as perpetually wronged by a cruel universe, while refusing to take any action to change their circumstances. Or they might be possessed by the judge archetype, developing righteous certainty about everyone else's failings, while maintaining they personally desire nothing, and therefore are beyond judgment themselves. Here is what makes this so insidious. Archetypal possession feels meaningful. The person experiences a sense of purpose and identity. But it is not their purpose. It is not their identity. They have become a channel for impersonal forces, while their actual self has disappeared into passivity. Jung wrote that the person who wants nothing has committed psychological suicide while their body continues to function. The ego that should be directing their life has abdicated its throne, and unconscious forces have seized power. But there is an even more subtle danger that Jung identified in the state of wanting nothing. Many people who enter this state believe they have achieved spiritual enlightenment. They confuse the absence of desire with the transcendence of desire. This is what Jung called ego inflation, disguised as spiritual attainment. The person convinces themselves that wanting nothing is a sign of wisdom. They have risen above the petty concerns of ordinary people. They no longer need what others need. They have achieved a state beyond struggle. Jung recognized this as one of the most dangerous forms of inflation because it masquerades as its opposite. Empaths aren't broken, they're alchemists in progress. The alchemist's path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook, in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com. The person believes they have eliminated ego when in fact their ego has inflated to cosmic proportions. They have identified with the archetype of the wise one or the enlightened master. This creates an impenetrable psychological defense. Any attempt to point out their inflation is interpreted as evidence that the other person simply has not reached their level of understanding. Any suggestion that they might be avoiding life rather than transcending it is dismissed as the projection of unenlightened minds. Jung observed that people trapped in this inflated state of wanting nothing become completely unteachable. They cannot receive feedback because they have positioned themselves above the need for growth. Meanwhile, their actual psychological development has frozen completely. The difference between authentic non-attachment and the dangerous void of wanting nothing is this. Authentic non-attachment comes from conscious choice after deep engagement with life. The dangerous void comes from giving up before you have fully lived. Jung studied spiritual practitioners who had genuinely transcended personal desire through years of inner work. These individuals still had will, they still made choices, they still engaged with life, but their engagement came from a place of conscious freedom rather than unconscious compulsion. The person trapped in wanting nothing has no freedom. They are paralyzed by indifference, while unconscious forces control their behavior. They believe they have transcended need, but they have actually become slaves to their own unintegrated psyche. Jung wrote about patients who entered therapy claiming they wanted nothing, only to discover they were terrified of wanting anything, because every desire they had ever expressed had been crushed, mocked, or used against them. Wanting nothing was not enlightenment. It was a defense mechanism against repeated psychological trauma. The psyche does not give up on desire easily. When someone truly wants nothing, it is because wanting has become associated with pain so intense that complete shutdown feels safer than continued vulnerability. But safety through shutdown is an illusion. The pain does not disappear. It accumulates in the unconscious, feeding the shadow and attracting archetypal possession. Jung identified another terrifying consequence of wanting nothing that most people never recognize. When you stop directing your life energy through conscious desire, you become a magnet for your unresolved trauma. This is what Jung called negative synchronicity or repetition, compulsion operating at maximum power. Without conscious will to direct your life, your unconscious patterns take full control. You unconsciously recreate the exact situations that wounded you in the first place, over and over, while believing yourself to be a passive victim of cruel fate. The person who wants nothing after being betrayed will unconsciously attract more betrayal. They will choose partners who repeat the original wound. They will enter situations that guarantee abandonment, all while claiming they do not care enough to be intentional about their choices. Jung observed this pattern repeatedly. Patients would say they wanted nothing from relationships, from career, from life itself, yet they consistently ended up in identical, painful situations. When Jung pointed out the pattern, they would claim coincidence or bad luck. But there is no coincidence in the psyche. When you want nothing consciously, your unconscious wants everything. And what it wants most is to resolve the original wound by recreating it until you finally choose to heal it consciously. The only way out of this cycle is to want something again, to choose a direction, to assert will. But for people trapped in wanting nothing, this feels impossible. They have forgotten how to want. So what is the alternative? What does healthy desire look like after you understand the dangers of wanting nothing? Jung spent years developing what he called the process of individuation. This is not about eliminating desire. It is about becoming conscious of your desires and choosing which ones deserve your energy. The individuated person does not want nothing. They want consciously. They have examined their desires and separated authentic longings from unconscious compulsions. They know the difference between wanting something because it serves their growth and wanting something because it would distract them from facing their shadow. This requires brutal honesty. You must be willing to examine why you want what you want. Is this desire coming from your authentic self, or is it coming from an unconscious complex trying to resolve old trauma? The person who wants nothing has skipped this difficult work. They have collapsed all desire rather than doing the hard work of differentiating healthy from unhealthy wanting. Jung taught his patients to rebuild their capacity to want by starting small, not with grand life goals, but with simple daily preferences. What do you want for breakfast? What do you want to do this afternoon? What conversation do you want to have? Many patients found even these simple questions agonizing. They had trained themselves so thoroughly to want nothing that accessing any preference felt dangerous. But Jung insisted they practice. Because wanting nothing is not freedom. It is psychological death while the body still breathes. As patients rebuilt their capacity to want, Jung taught them to integrate their shadow simultaneously. Because healthy desire requires accepting that you contain the full spectrum of human capacity, including the parts you find ugly or frightening. The person who can want consciously is the person who knows they are capable of selfishness, manipulation, and cruelty, yet chooses otherwise through conscious will. The person who wants nothing has simply refused to look at these parts of themselves, and what you refuse to see will control you. Jung also emphasized the importance of conscious will in maintaining identity against archetypal possession. When you want nothing, archetypes possess you because there is no strong ego to resist them. When you want consciously, you can engage with archetypal energy without being consumed by it. You can feel the pull of the victim archetype without becoming the victim. You can recognize the judge archetype rising in you without letting it take over your perception. This is the power of conscious desire. It keeps you anchored in your individual identity, while archetypal forces move through you. Jung wrote that the most dangerous thing about wanting nothing is how reasonable it seems. In a world full of suffering, disappointment, and loss, wanting nothing feels like the only sane response. Why keep setting yourself up for pain? But this reasoning is a trap. Life without desire is not life. It is a slow psychological death that looks like survival. You avoid the acute pain, of disappointed desire, only to experience the chronic agony of a life unlived. Jung observed that patients who entered this state often came from backgrounds where their desires had been systematically crushed. Parents who mocked their dreams, partners who betrayed their trust, systems that punished their authenticity. After enough disappointment, the psyche learns that wanting anything is dangerous, so it develops what Jung called the defense of total withdrawal. If you want nothing, nothing can hurt you. This logic seems sound until you understand what actually happens when desire disappears. The energy that would have gone into pursuing goals does not evaporate. It turns inward, feeding unconscious processes that were never meant to have this much power. Your shadow grows stronger. Your autonomous complexes gain independence. Your unresolved trauma starts directing your life from behind the scenes. Jung documented cases where patients experienced physical symptoms from this redirected energy: chronic fatigue that had no medical cause, persistent pain that appeared and disappeared without explanation. The body was expressing what the conscious mind refused to feel, because when you want nothing consciously, your body still wants. Your unconscious still wants. Your shadow still wants. And all that wanting has to go somewhere. This is why people in states of wanting nothing often develop what looks like bizarre behavior to outside observers. They claim they do not care about anything, yet they react with intense emotion to minor slights. They say they have no preferences, yet they sabotage any situation that might lead to actual change. The person is not being inconsistent. They are being controlled by unconscious forces that have very strong wants indeed. The shadow wants to express the aggression that has been repressed. The autonomous complexes want to play out their unresolved dramas. The archetypes want to manifest their impersonal patterns. All of this happens while the conscious mind maintains its position of wanting nothing. The disconnect between conscious claim and unconscious reality creates a split that Jung considered extremely dangerous. Jung believed that every human being has a responsibility to individuate, to become fully themselves. This is not optional if you want to avoid becoming a danger to yourself and others. The person who wants nothing has abandoned this responsibility. They have decided that protecting themselves from pain is more important than becoming real. But the pain does not go away. It transforms into something more insidious. The person who wants nothing does not feel the sharp pain of loss. They feel the dull ache of perpetual emptiness, and emptiness attracts demons. Jung used this language deliberately. He knew that autonomous complexes and archetypal possession could function like demonic possession in the lives of his patients. Not literal demons, but psychological forces so powerful and autonomous that they might as well be external entities. The person who wants nothing has left their psychological house unguarded, and unguarded houses do not stay empty. What fills the vacuum is not random. It is specifically the content you have spent your life repressing, the anger you never expressed, the grief you never processed, the desires you deemed too dangerous to acknowledge. All of it rushes in when your conscious will stops providing direction. Jung called this the return of the repressed. And when repressed content returns to a psyche that has abandoned all desire, it does not return gently. It floods in with overwhelming force, often triggering what looks like sudden personality changes or psychological breakdowns. The person who has been claiming for years that they want nothing will suddenly become obsessed with something. They will pursue it with frightening intensity, completely overtaken by forces they cannot understand or control. This is not them suddenly discovering what they want. This is archetypal possession masquerading as desire. Jung documented cases where patients in states of wanting nothing would suddenly join cults, develop fixations on inappropriate people, or make catastrophic life decisions with absolute certainty. They were not making choices. They were being chosen by unconscious forces that had accumulated too much power during years of conscious passivity. This is why Jung insisted that wanting consciously is a form of psychological hygiene. It is not about getting what you want. It is about maintaining enough conscious control over your psychic energy that unconscious forces cannot hijack your life. Here is what you need to understand if you recognize yourself in this pattern. Wanting nothing is not your fault. It is a survival mechanism that made sense at some point in your life, but it is no longer serving you. It is killing you slowly from the inside. The way out begins with the smallest desire, not a grand vision for your life, but a simple preference. What do you actually want right now? Not what you should want, not what others want for you, but what you genuinely want. If you cannot answer that question, start even smaller. What do you not want? Sometimes discovering what you reject is the first step toward discovering what you desire. The key is to start directing your psychic energy again. Even if you direct it poorly at first, even if you make mistakes, any conscious direction is better than the void of wanting nothing. Because when you want nothing, something else is still wanting for you. And that something is not working in your interest. It is working out unresolved trauma, expressing repressed shadow content, and channeling archetypal energies that have nothing to do with your individual development. You were not born to want nothing. You were born to individuate, to become fully yourself, to engage with life consciously. The state of wanting nothing is a betrayal of your fundamental nature. Jung's most profound insight about this state was simple, but devastating. The person who wants nothing has not transcended suffering. They have just stopped fighting. And when you stop fighting for your own life, your unconscious starts fighting against it. The danger of wanting nothing is not that you will feel empty forever. The danger is that the emptiness will fill with forces you never chose and cannot control. Your shadow will act without your awareness. Archetypes will possess your identity. Your unresolved trauma will recreate itself endlessly. And you will experience all of this while maintaining that you are at peace because you want nothing. But that is not peace. That is surrender to psychological forces that will use you and discard you. Real peace comes from conscious engagement with life, from wanting things that align with your authentic nature, from choosing who you become rather than letting your unconscious decide for you. Jung spent his entire career trying to wake people up to this danger. The state of wanting nothing looks like wisdom, it feels like protection, but it is the most dangerous psychological state you can enter because it hands control of your life to forces that were never meant to rule. If there is one thing you take from Jung's work on this topic, let it be this. You must want something. Not everything, not unconsciously, but something. Because the alternative to conscious wanting is not freedom. It is possession by everything you refuse to face in yourself. The danger of wanting nothing anymore is that you disappear while something else takes your place. And by the time you realize what has happened, you may have lost years to a life you never consciously chose. Want something, anything, but want it consciously, want it authentically, and want it enough to fight for it. Because wanting consciously is what keeps you human, keeps you real, and keeps you in control of your own psychological house. The person who wants nothing has already lost the most important battle ever fought, the battle to remain themselves. They have surrendered completely to forces they cannot see, and lost the war before knowing it had begun. Jung's warning echoes across decades with urgent, undeniable clarity. The danger is real, immediate, and growing stronger with each passing moment of emptiness. In The Alchemist's Path, perception training for empaths, you'll turn overwhelm into wisdom with practical drills, Jung-inspired boundaries, and step-by-step perception training. This guide includes 3 exclusive chapter videos to deepen each lesson. Written by Surreal Mind, 236 pages, beautifully designed 8.5 by 11 downloadable ebook, in stock now. Start your training today. Feel deeply while thinking clearly. Get The Alchemist's Path thesurrealmind.com. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.